November 23, 1944. Fort Stockton, Texas. Dr. Horace Whitmore pressed his fountain pen against the medical examination log. The paper was government issue. Cheap. It absorbed ink too quickly, making his handwriting blur at the edges. He wrote anyway. Subject number 17. Bachmann, Katarina. Age 24. Height 5 feet 6 inches. Weight 89 pounds. He paused. Calculated. Wrote 3 more numbers. BMI 14.3. Then one word in red ink. Critical. The woman on the examination table didn't move, didn't flinch. Her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere above his left shoulder, not looking at him, not looking at anything. Dr. Whitmore had seen that look before, in field hospitals during the Great War, in the faces of men who had stopped hoping to survive. He wrote 3 more words beneath the red ink. 3 weeks, maximum. The examination room smelled of carbolic soap and desert dust. Outside, the November sun hammered down on West Texas hardpan. Inside, the woman shivered despite the heat. Her uniform hung loose. Gray wool, once tailored to fit. Now it draped like fabric on a wire frame. The insignia on her collar identified her as a Wehrmacht communications officer. Unteroffizierin, technical sergeant equivalent. Her hands rested on her knees. The knuckles were prominent. The skin stretched tight over bone. Dr. Whitmore set down his pen. "Sprechen Sie English?" he asked. His German was medical school basic, functional but limited. The woman's eyes shifted, met his. For the first time since entering the room, she looked directly at him. "Yes," she said, "I speak English." Her voice was quiet, precise. The accent was educated Berlin, not harsh Prussian. This was the German of universities and concert halls. "Good," he said. "That makes this easier." He picked up the stethoscope. The metal was cold against his palm. "I need to listen to your heart." She unbuttoned her uniform jacket without protest. Beneath it, she wore a thin cotton undershirt. Her collarbones stood out like fence posts. The stethoscope found her heartbeat. Slow, too slow. The rhythm of a body conserving every calorie it could. 70 beats per minute. In a healthy 24-year-old woman, it should be closer to 85. He moved the stethoscope to her lungs, listened. Clear. No fluid. No infection. Small mercy. "When did you last eat a full meal?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes went distant again. "Define full," she said finally. It wasn't defiance. It was a genuine question. Dr. Whitmore lowered the stethoscope. "More than bread and soup." "February," she said, 1944. "My mother's birthday. We had potato pancakes, real potatoes. 4 of us split 2 pancakes." 9 months ago. He wrote that down too. "And before that?" "Christmas 1943. Half a goose among 6 people." 11 months. She watched him write. Her expression didn't change. "You're documenting this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why?" Dr. Whitmore capped his pen, looked at her directly. "Because when this war ends, someone will claim we didn't treat you properly, or that your condition was exaggerated, or that the numbers were propaganda." He tapped the log. "Data doesn't lie." Something flickered in her eyes. Not hope. Not quite. Something more fragile. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that someone was paying attention. "Stand up, please," he said. She did. Her legs trembled slightly, not from fear, from muscle wasting. He measured her again, confirmed the numbers. 89 pounds on a 5'6" frame. In medical school, they'd taught him the body mass index calculation. Weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. Normal range for an adult woman was between 20 and 22. 14.3 meant severe malnutrition. It meant organ failure was imminent. It meant death was a matter of weeks, not months. He helped her sit back down. "How many others are in your condition?" he asked. "Most of us." "How many exactly?" She thought about it, counting in her head. 32, maybe 33, it's hard to tell. We all look the same now. 44 women had arrived at Fort Stockton 2 weeks ago, November 2nd, transported from a holding facility in New Jersey, captured in France during the Allied advance through Alsace on October 15th. If 32 of them were in Bachmann's condition, the camp was looking at a medical crisis. Dr. Whitmore stood, opened the door, called for Lieutenant Ruth Hargrove. She appeared within seconds, young, capable, one of the few female officers in the United States Army. "Get me the complete roster," he said. "Every woman in the German POW unit. I want height, weight, and visible condition. And I want it by 1800 hours." "Yes, sir." She left. Dr. Whitmore turned back to Bachmann. "You can dress." She buttoned her jacket. Her fingers were steady, despite their thinness. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we implement protocol." Protocol? Geneva Convention, Article 26. Prisoners of war shall receive rations equivalent to depot troops of the detaining power. He watched her process that. "You're going to feed us?" "Yes." "The same as your soldiers?" "Yes." She looked at him, really looked, searching his face for deception. "Our officers told us Americans torture prisoners," she said quietly. "That capture was worse than death. That we should fight to the last bullet and save one for ourselves." Dr. Whitmore had heard this before, from other German prisoners. The propaganda machine had done its work thoroughly. "Your officers lied," he said. "I'm beginning to understand that." He made a note in her file, then looked up. "What's your first name?" "Katarina. My friends call me Kat." "Katarina," he repeated. "You're going to survive this, but you need to trust the process. No rapid feeding, no gorging. Your body needs time to adjust." "How much time?" 12 weeks, minimum. He saw the calculation in her eyes. 12 weeks from late November meant late February, midwinter. "Will we be here that long?" she asked. "That's not my decision, but medically, yes. You need to be here that long." She nodded slowly. "Thank you, doctor." He helped her down from the examination table. She was lighter than his medical bag, fragile as dry kindling. At the door, she paused. "The others," she said, "the ones worse than me. Will they survive?" Dr. Whitmore didn't believe in lying to patients. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure they do." She left. He returned to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a bottle of bourbon and a glass. He didn't drink, poured one finger anyway, stared at it. 32 critically malnourished women, most of them younger than his own daughter. He thought about the men he'd treated in France in 1918, the ones who'd starved in German POW camps, the hollow-eyed skeletons who'd come back broken. He thought about revenge, how easy it would be to simply follow minimum requirements. Feed them enough to keep them alive, but not enough to recover. Let them suffer the way Allied prisoners had suffered in German hands. He thought about that for exactly 10 seconds. Then he poured the bourbon back into the bottle. He was a doctor. He had standards. And standards didn't change based on the nationality of the patient. He picked up the telephone, dialed the mess hall. "Caldwell," a woman's voice answered. "Sergeant, this is Dr. Whitmore. I need to see you immediately." "On my way, sir." 3 minutes later, Sergeant Winifred Caldwell stood in his office doorway. She was 35, broad-shouldered, hands scarred from years of kitchen work. She'd grown up on a Nebraska farm, knew how to feed hundreds of men on a limited budget. She was the best mess sergeant Fort Stockton had. "Sir?" Dr. Whitmore handed her the preliminary numbers. She read them. Her face tightened. "Jesus Christ." "Exactly." She looked up. "What do you need?" "A feeding plan, gradual, controlled, starting with easily digestible foods, nothing that will shock their systems." "How long do I have?" "Ideally, 2 weeks to prepare. But realistically, I want to start immediately." Sergeant Caldwell pulled out a small notebook, started writing. "Bone broth," she said. "Soft bread, mashed potatoes, nothing fried, nothing too rich." "Agreed." "What about Thanksgiving?" Dr. Whitmore paused. He'd forgotten. November 23rd was in 2 days. Thanksgiving, the biggest meal of the American year. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Caldwell looked at the numbers again. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that these women have forgotten what abundance looks like. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe part of healing isn't just the food. It's remembering that food exists." Dr. Whitmore considered that. "The Geneva Convention requires equal rations," he said. "If we're serving Thanksgiving dinner to the troops, we serve it to the prisoners." "Even the Germans?" "Especially the Germans." Sergeant Caldwell nodded. "Then I'll need to requisition supplies, a lot of supplies." "Make a list. I'll authorize it." She did, right there in his office, writing quickly, calculating portions. 180 pounds of turkey, 60 pounds of potatoes, 45 pounds of sugar, butter, flour, cranberries, spices. The cost came to $2.35 per prisoner, $103.40 total. Dr. Whitmore signed the requisition without hesitation. "Get it from San Antonio," he said. "Use the priority supply line." "That's 850 miles, sir." "I'm aware. 48-hour delivery minimum." "Then we'd better send it today." She saluted, turned to leave, stopped at the door. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are we doing this? I mean, really. These women wore the uniform, served the Reich. Some of them probably still believe in it." It was a fair question. Dr. Whitmore walked to the window, looked out at the camp, rows of barracks, guard towers, barbed wire catching the afternoon light. "Because," he said, "the day we start treating people the way their government treated people is the day we become what we're fighting against." Sergeant Caldwell was quiet for a moment. "My brother died at Anzio," she said. "German artillery." "I know. I signed your compassionate leave request." "And you still want me to cook them Thanksgiving dinner?" "I'm not asking you to forgive anything, Sergeant. I'm asking you to do your job, which is to feed the people in this camp according to regulation. Can you do that?" She met his eyes. "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Good, because I need you to do it better than you've ever done it before." She left. Dr. Whitmore returned to his desk, opened Katharina Bachmann's file again. Subject 17, age 24, BMI 14.3, 3 weeks maximum. He drew a line through those last 3 words, wrote new ones. 12-week recovery protocol begins November 23rd. Then he started drafting the formal medical plan. Week 1, 1,200 calories per day, soft foods. Monitor for refeeding syndrome. Watch for edema. Check electrolytes daily. Week 2, 1,500 calories. Add vitamins B1 and B12. Continue monitoring. Week 4, 1,800 calories. Introduce normal textures. Track weight gain. Target, 2 pounds per week. Anything faster would strain their hearts. Anything slower meant they wouldn't recover in time. He worked until the light failed, until Lieutenant Hargrove knocked with the complete roster. 44 women, ages 18 to 52. Average weight, 91 pounds. Average BMI, 14.1. 32 in critical condition. 8 in serious condition. 4 in fair condition. 0 in good health. He read the names, matched them to ages, to weights, to conditions. Bachmann, Katharina, 24, 89 pounds. Reinhardt, Margareta, 21, 84 pounds, former surgical nurse from Hamburg. Brenner, Ursula, 28, 91 pounds, administrative clerk from Dresden. All of them had families. All of them had lives before the war. All of them were somebody's daughter, sister, friend. All of them were dying. Dr. Whitmore closed the file. Tomorrow he would brief Colonel Townsend, explain the situation. Request authorization for the extended medical protocol. Tonight he would go to his quarters and try not to think about what would happen if the requisition didn't arrive in time. If the supply trucks broke down. If Thanksgiving came and there was nothing to serve but the same thin soup these women had been eating for months. But the requisition did arrive, 47 hours later, November 22nd, 1 day before Thanksgiving. The trucks rolled through the main gate at 1400 hours. Sergeant Caldwell supervised the unloading personally, checking every crate, counting every pound. 180 pounds of turkey, delivered frozen, perfect condition. 60 pounds of Idaho potatoes, firm, no rot. 45 pounds of sugar. 30 pounds of butter, flour, salt, pepper, sage, thyme, rosemary, cranberries, fresh from Massachusetts. Pumpkins, 6 of them, grown in the Rio Grande Valley. Heavy cream, real cream, not reconstituted powder. Nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, everything she'd requested, everything she needed. Sergeant Caldwell stood in the mess hall storage room, surrounded by abundance, and for the first time since her brother's death, she allowed herself to feel something other than grief. She felt purpose. Her staff started work immediately, preparing the turkeys, mixing the dough for rolls, peeling potatoes. The smell began to spread through the camp by evening, rich, warm, the scent of butter melting, of herbs releasing their oils, of sugar caramelizing. In Barracks 7, Katharina Bachmann smelled it. She was lying on her bunk, thin government mattress, thinner blanket, but warmer than anything she'd had in Berlin. The smell drifted through the gaps in the wooden walls. At first, she didn't recognize it. Then she did. Roasting meat. Her stomach cramped, not from hunger, from memory. She hadn't smelled roasting meat in over a year. The last time had been Christmas 1943, her uncle's apartment in Charlottenburg, before the firebombing, before the city became rubble and ash. They'd pooled their ration cards for weeks, saved every pfennig, bought half a goose from a farmer who'd come into the city under cover of darkness. 6 people had eaten that goose: Kat, her mother and father, her younger brother, her uncle and aunt. They'd made it last 3 days, slicing the meat paper-thin, boiling the bones for broth, rendering the fat to spread on bread. Her brother had cried when it was gone, actual tears. He was 14 years old, and he'd cried over a goose carcass. Now, in Texas, the smell was everywhere. Greta Reinhardt sat up in the bunk below. "Do you smell that?" she whispered. "Yes." "What is it?" "Turkey, I think. Maybe chicken." "Why would they be cooking meat?" Kat didn't answer. She didn't know. Across the barracks, Ursula Brenner stood at the window, pressing her face against the glass, trying to see the mess hall. "It's coming from there," she said. "The American kitchen." "Maybe it's for the guards," someone suggested. "Maybe it's Thanksgiving," Greta said quietly. The word hung in the air. Thanksgiving. They'd heard about it. The American holiday. 4th Thursday in November. A day of feasting, of excess. "They wouldn't," Ursula said. "We're prisoners." But the smell kept coming, growing stronger. Turkey and sage and butter and something else. Something sweet and spiced that none of them could identify. Kat closed her eyes. In Berlin, by now, the bread rations would have been distributed. 200 grams per person. If the supply convoy made it through, if the Allies hadn't bombed the rail lines, if the warehouse hadn't been hit. 200 grams of bread, mixed with sawdust and potato flour to make it stretch. That was dinner in Berlin. Here the smell of abundance filled the air, mocking them, tormenting them, or promising them something. She couldn't tell which. She reached under her mattress, felt for the one thing she'd hidden there, the one possession she'd managed to keep through capture, through transport, through processing. Her grandmother's silver spoon. It was small, tarnished. The handle was bent from where her grandmother had used it to pry open a stuck window during an air raid. Her grandmother had died 2 years ago, before the worst of the hunger, before the city burned. The spoon was all Kat had left. She held it in her palm, felt the weight of it, the cool metal warming against her skin. In 5 weeks, that spoon would become a gift, a promise, a bridge between enemy and friend. But she didn't know that yet. None of them did. November 23rd arrived with a West Texas sunrise. Hard light, clear sky, temperature already climbing toward 70 degrees. The prisoners assembled for morning roll call at 0600 hours. 44 women in gray uniforms, standing in formation, answering to their numbers. Lieutenant Hargrove conducted the count, efficiently, without commentary. When she finished, she didn't dismiss them. Instead, Colonel James Townsend stepped forward. He was 52 years old, tall, gray at the temples. His uniform showed ribbons from the Great War, Belleau Wood, Chateau Thierry, the Meuse Argonne. He'd seen what war did to people. He spoke in English. Lieutenant Hargrove translated into German, sentence by sentence. Today is Thanksgiving in America. It's a day when we give thanks for what we have, and we share our abundance with others. The women listened, not moving, not reacting. You are prisoners of war, but you are also human beings, far from home, in a foreign land. Some of the women shifted, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. Today, we will share our Thanksgiving meal with you, not because you've earned it, Not because we expect gratitude, but because it's right." He paused. Let the translation catch up. "At 1200 hours, you will report to the main mess hall. You will be seated. You will be served the same meal that every soldier in this camp receives. The same portions, the same quality." Kat felt her heart beating faster, felt the disbelief spreading through the formation. "This is not a trick," Colonel Townsend said. "This is not propaganda. This is simply what we do. Today, you are our guests." He saluted, dismissed them. The women broke formation slowly, moving toward their barracks in silence. Inside, the whispers started. "It's a trick. It has to be a trick. Why would they feed us? To make us weak, to break our discipline, to humiliate us." Ursula stood in the center of the barracks. "Listen to me," she said. Her voice cut through the speculation. "Whatever they're planning, we maintain dignity. We show no weakness. We expect nothing." The others nodded. But Kat noticed Greta's hands shaking, noticed the younger women swallowing hard, fighting tears. They were hungry, all of them. Hungry in a way that went beyond the stomach. Hungry in a way that hollowed out the soul. And the Americans were offering food. The hours crawled toward noon. In the mess hall, Sergeant Caldwell and her staff worked with military precision. The turkeys came out of the ovens at 11:30, golden brown, skin crackling, juices running clear. The potatoes were whipped with butter and cream, mountains of white fluff. The cranberry sauce gleamed ruby red in its serving bowls. The rolls were piled high, steaming, soft. And the pies, 6 pumpkin pies, made from scratch, real pumpkin, real eggs, real cream. Sergeant Caldwell had made pumpkin pie 1,000 times. On the farm in Nebraska, for harvest festivals, for family dinners. She'd never made it with this much at stake. At 11:45, Dr. Whitmore entered the mess hall, inspected the setup. "It's perfect," he said. "It's just food, sir." "No, Sergeant. Today, it's evidence. Evidence that everything they were told about us was a lie." At 11:55, the doors opened. The German prisoners entered in formation, still disciplined, still wary. They stood at attention until Colonel Townsend gave the order. "Please, sit." Lieutenant Hargrove repeated it in German. Slowly they moved to the tables. Kat found herself seated between Greta and a young private. He had sandy hair and nervous hands, kind eyes, farm boy face. Across from her sat Ursula, still rigid, still watchful. The American soldiers filled the remaining seats. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. None looked hostile. At exactly 1200 hours, Sergeant Caldwell gave the signal. The kitchen doors opened, and the platters came. Turkey, sliced thick, steam rising. Potatoes, mounded high, butter melting. Green beans, cranberry sauce, rolls, gravy in ceramic boats, plate after plate after plate. The serving staff moved down the tables, placing portions in front of each person, German and American alike. 8 ounces of turkey, 6 ounces of potatoes, 3 ounces of cranberry sauce, 2 rolls, green beans, gravy. 1,200 calories. More food than Kat had seen in 9 months. She stared at her plate. Beside her, Greta had stopped breathing. Across the table, Ursula's mask cracked, just for a second, just enough to show the hunger beneath. The young private beside Kat picked up his fork, looked at her, set it down. "Ma'am?" His voice was quiet, uncertain. "I'm Patterson. James Patterson, from Minnesota. Kat nodded, didn't trust herself to speak. Nobody moved. The mess hall was silent except for the sound of serving spoons against metal trays. Then Colonel Townsend stood. "Before we eat," he said, "I want to say something." The room waited. "I fought in France in 1918. I saw what war does, what it takes from people, what it costs." His voice was steady, no theatrics, just truth. "Today, on Thanksgiving, I'm grateful that we have the capacity to show mercy, that we have the abundance to share, and that we have the wisdom to remember that every person in this room is somebody's child." He sat down. Lieutenant Hargrove translated. Several of the German women blinked rapidly. "Now," Colonel Townsend said, "let's eat." The Americans began, cutting turkey, spreading butter, passing salt. The German women hesitated. Then, slowly, Greta picked up her fork, cut a piece of turkey, lifted it to her mouth, chewed, her eyes closed. One by one, the others followed. The food was real. The food was abundant. The food was theirs. Kat took her first bite. Turkey, sage, butter, flavors she'd forgotten existed. Her throat tightened. She took another bite. Potatoes, cream, salt. Another. Cranberry, tart and sweet at once. Her vision blurred. Around the table she heard it. Small sounds, quiet gasps, shaking breaths. Someone was crying. Then someone else. Then half the table. Greta set down her fork, put her face in her hands, sobbed. Kat tried to keep eating, tried to maintain control, failed. The tears came anyway, not from gratitude, from grief, from the sudden, overwhelming weight of understanding just how much had been taken from them, how long they'd been starved, how thoroughly they'd been lied to. The Americans had abundance. Germany had lies. And here, in a mess hall in Texas, the truth tasted like butter and sage and cream. Private Patterson beside her pulled out a handkerchief, offered it. Kat took it, pressed it to her face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She looked at him, not understanding. "For whatever put you here," he said. "I'm sorry." She couldn't answer, could only nod. The meal continued, slowly, between tears and stunned silence. And then Sergeant Caldwell emerged from the kitchen, carrying something new. 6 pies, golden, perfect, topped with whipped cream. She moved from table to table, cutting slices, placing them carefully in front of each person. When she reached Kat, she paused. "Pumpkin pie," she said. "Traditional American Thanksgiving dessert." Kat looked at the slice. The filling was smooth, orange gold. The crust was flaky. The cream sat on top like a cloud. She picked up her fork, cut through all 3 layers at once, lifted it to her mouth. The first bite dissolved on her tongue. Sweet, creamy, spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg and something else she couldn't name. It tasted like safety, like abundance, like everything Germany had denied its people while promising victory. Kat put down her fork and wept. Not quietly this time. Deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere she'd kept locked since her capture. Around her, 30 other women did the same. The sound filled the mess hall, raw, uncontrolled, the sound of dams breaking, of lies collapsing, of certainty shattering. The Americans sat in stunned silence. Private Patterson didn't know what to do. Nobody had trained him for this. For enemy soldiers crying into their plates over dessert. Dr. Whitmore stood near the wall, watching, taking notes. This, he thought, is what the truth looks like. This is what happens when propaganda meets reality. This is what breaking feels like. Sergeant Caldwell stood in the kitchen doorway, hands shaking. She'd made 6 pumpkin pies. She'd just destroyed an empire. The crying lasted 17 minutes. Dr. Whitmore timed it. Not out of callousness, out of medical necessity. Emotional breakdown of this magnitude indicated psychological trauma, compounding physical starvation. He needed to document it, needed to understand it. 17 minutes of sustained weeping from 31 women simultaneously. The sound was unlike anything the American soldiers had heard. Not the sharp grief of sudden loss, not the quiet despair of long suffering. This was something else. This was the sound of certainty dying. Katerina Bachmann pressed Private Patterson's handkerchief against her face. The fabric was clean, government issue. It smelled of laundry soap and Texas dust, not of smoke, not of rubble, not of Berlin. She tried to stop crying, tried to regain control, the discipline they drilled into her during training, the rigidity that had kept her alive through capture and transport. None of it worked. The pie sat on her plate, half-eaten. The whipped cream was melting into the filling, creating small pools of white in the orange-gold surface. Beside her, Greta had given up entirely. The young nurse sat with her head down, shoulders shaking. Her plate was empty. She'd eaten everything. Every bite of turkey, every spoonful of potatoes, every morsel of cranberry sauce, the pie. And now she sat there, crying silently, staring at the empty plate like it was evidence in a trial. Private Patterson finally spoke. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked slightly. Is there something wrong with the food?" Kat looked at him, really looked. He was maybe 22, younger than her. Farm boy face, honest eyes. Genuinely concerned that the meal had somehow made them sick. She tried to answer in English, failed, tried again. "No," she managed. The food is perfect." "Then why?" "Because," Ursula said suddenly. Her English was better, more practiced. "Because you have abundance, and we have lies." The table fell silent. Ursula stood, slowly. Her legs were steadier than they'd been 2 weeks ago. Dr. Whitmore's initial feeding protocol was working. 1,200 calories a day. Bone broth, soft bread, building back gradually. But standing was still an effort. She stood anyway, looked around the mess hall, at the American soldiers, at her fellow prisoners, at the empty platters and the half-eaten pies and the evidence of impossible generosity. "Our government," she said, each word carefully chosen, "told us you starve, that America is weak, that you have nothing, that you are desperate." She gestured at the table. "But you give us pie." Lieutenant Hargrove started to translate into German. Ursula stopped her. "No, they understand. And if they don't understand the words, they understand this." She picked up her empty plate, held it up. "This is more food than I have seen in 9 months. 9 months. In Berlin, I processed requisition forms. I saw the numbers. I knew how little we had, how much we were losing. But they told us it was temporary. They told us when we won, everything would be plentiful." Her voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "You are winning, and you are not starving. You are winning, and you have so much you can share it with your enemies." She set down the plate, sat down, put her head in her hands. The mess hall stayed silent. Then Colonel Townsend spoke. "You're not our enemies right now," he said quietly. "Right now, you're hungry people being fed. That's all." Lieutenant Hargrove translated. Several of the German women made sounds, not quite sobs, not quite gasps, something in between. Private Patterson looked at Kat. His expression was troubled, thoughtful. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "my family, we're dairy farmers in Minnesota. We know what hunger looks like, in animals, when the feed runs low, when winter's been too long." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What you went through, what all of you went through, that wasn't just hunger. That was something else, something worse." Kat met his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know. We see you, not as Germans, not as prisoners, as people who survived something nobody should have to survive." It was a small moment, but it mattered. Kat closed her eyes and remembered. Berlin, February 1944. The ration distribution center on Wilhelmstrasse, 3 blocks from her communications office. She'd gone at dawn, standing in line before her shift started. The line stretched around the corner. 200 people, maybe 300, all waiting for their weekly allocation. 200 grams of bread. If the supplies arrived, if the convoy made it through, if the warehouse hadn't been bombed the night before. She'd stood there for 2 hours, coat pulled tight, breath frosting in the air. The woman in front of her had a child, maybe 8 years old, boy, thin coat, no gloves. The mother kept counting something in her pocket, over and over. Kat could hear the rustle of paper, ration cards. When they finally reached the front of the line, the baker handed over a loaf. One loaf, dark, dense. The crust was rough. The woman held it like it was gold. Outside, she broke off a piece, gave it to the boy. He ate it slowly, making it last. The mother didn't take any for herself. Kat had watched them walk away, the boy chewing, the mother's hand on his shoulder. She'd gotten her own ration, bread mixed with sawdust and potato flour. It tasted like cardboard, like defeat. She'd eaten half immediately, standing right there on the street, too hungry to wait. That was February. By March, the rations had dropped to 150 grams. By April, 100. By May, if you got bread at all, you counted yourself lucky. The communications office where Kat worked had a radio. They monitored Allied broadcasts, propaganda mostly, but sometimes real information slipped through. Reports of American supply lines, convoys stretching from Normandy to Paris, tens of thousands of trucks, moving supplies day and night, food, ammunition, equipment, medicine, everything. Kat had translated those broadcasts, had typed up the reports, had filed them for the intelligence officers to review, and she'd thought it was exaggeration, propaganda, American lies designed to make Germany feel weak. But now she sat in Texas with pie on her tongue and understood. It wasn't propaganda, it was truth. America had abundance, real abundance, so much that they could serve Thanksgiving dinner to prisoners of war and not even blink at the cost, while Germany had sawdust bread and lies. Greta's memory was different. Hamburg, July 1943. Operation Gomorrah, the British called it. The firebombing that turned the city into an inferno. Greta had been working in the municipal hospital, 2nd floor, surgical ward. When the sirens went off, they'd moved the patients to the basement, the ones who could be moved. The ones too critical stayed upstairs. Someone had to stay with them. Greta volunteered. She was 20 years old, certified surgical nurse, 3 years of training, 2 years of practice. She stayed upstairs with 6 patients who couldn't be evacuated. The bombs fell. Not explosives, incendiaries, thousands of them, designed to start fires, to create a firestorm. The hospital caught. 3rd floor first, then 2nd. The flames spread faster than anyone expected. Greta got 4 patients down the stairs, 4 out of 6. The other 2 burned. She could still hear their screaming sometimes when she closed her eyes, when the barracks got quiet at night. But that wasn't the worst memory. The worst came after. 3 days after the firebombing, the hospital was still standing, barely. Walls blackened, windows blown out, but functioning. They had wounded, thousands of them. Burns, crush injuries, smoke inhalation, and no supplies. The supply depot had burned. The backup warehouse had burned. Everything had burned. Greta worked 18-hour shifts with no bandages, no morphine, no antibiotics. They reused bandages, washed them in boiling water when they had water, used them until they fell apart. Patients died, not from their wounds, from infection, from complications that antibiotics would have prevented, from starvation, because the hospital kitchen had burned too, and the city's food distribution system had collapsed. They had wounded soldiers and civilians packed into every available space, and nothing to feed them. Greta watched people die from hunger in a hospital bed. She watched a woman whisper about her children with her last breath, about how she'd given them her rations, about how she'd told them she wasn't hungry when she was starving. The woman died weighing 73 pounds. Greta held her hand while it happened. She was 21 years old, and she'd learned what starvation looked like. Now, in Texas, she sat in front of abundance, turkey and potatoes and pie, and cried because the contrast was unbearable, because if Hamburg had been able to feed its wounded, her patients might have survived. Because if Germany had America's abundance, maybe the woman wouldn't have starved in a hospital bed. Because the whole war suddenly felt like a waste, a catastrophic, murderous waste. Ursula's memory was colder. Dresden, December 1943 through October 1944. She'd worked in the Reich Food Ministry's regional office, administrative clerk, processing requisition forms, tracking inventory, managing distribution schedules. She saw the numbers every day, every week, every month. The numbers told the story that the propaganda couldn't hide. In 1939, German civilian rations had been 2,400 calories per day, adequate, comfortable, enough to maintain health. By 1940, it dropped to 2,200. 1941, 2,000. 1942, 1,800. 1943, 1,200. 1944, 800. 800 calories for a full-grown adult. Manual laborers got slightly more. Children got slightly more. But regular civilians? 800. That was starvation. Slow starvation. Gradual starvation. But starvation nonetheless. Ursula had typed the reports, had filed the forms, had watched the numbers decline month by month. And she'd believed the explanations: temporary shortages, Allied interference, sabotage, the need to feed the military first, the promise that when victory came, abundance would return. She'd believed it because the alternative was unthinkable, that her government was lying, that the war was lost, that everything they'd sacrificed was for nothing. She'd had a family then, husband, son, 12 years old, smart, curious. Her husband worked in a munitions factory. Her son went to school. They'd survived on 800 calories a day. Barely. In September 1944, her husband made a mistake. He told a coworker that he thought the war was lost, that Germany couldn't win, that they should start negotiating peace. The coworker reported him. 2 days later, the SS came. They arrested her husband for defeatist talk, for undermining morale, for treason against the Reich. They arrested her son for being the son of a traitor. Ursula came home from work to an empty apartment. A notice on the door, official seal, official words. Your family has been detained for questioning. She never saw them again. In October, she received official notification. Her husband and son had been executed. Enemies of the state. 1 week later, she was conscripted into the Wehrmacht Women's Auxiliary Corps, sent to France, communications support. Captured October 15th during the Allied advance through Alsace. And now she sat in Texas, in front of a Thanksgiving meal she hadn't earned, crying because the regime that murdered her family had also lied about everything else, had lied about America, about abundance, about strength, had lied while German children starved and German families were executed for telling the truth. The pie tasted like ashes in her mouth, but she'd eaten it anyway, because it was real, and real was all she had left. The meal ended slowly, plates cleared, tables wiped, the German prisoners escorted back to their barracks by guards who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. Private Patterson walked beside Kat. Didn't say anything, just walked. At the barracks door, he stopped. "Ma'am, I just want you to know, if you need anything at all, you can ask." Kat didn't know what to say. "Thank you, Private Patterson." He nodded, walked away. Inside the barracks, the women gathered, 44 of them, sitting on bunks, standing by windows, processing what had just happened. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then someone said, "I want to go home." And someone else said, "What home? Hamburg is rubble. Berlin is burning. Dresden will be next." And someone else said, "My family disowned me for being captured. I have no home." The barracks fell silent again. Kat lay on her bunk, stared at the ceiling. Her grandmother's silver spoon was still hidden under her mattress. She could feel it, the small lump pressing against the thin padding. She thought about Berlin, about her parents, whether they were alive, whether the apartment still stood, whether there was anything left to return to. She thought about the pie, the sweetness, the abundance. She thought about Dr. Whitmore's examination, his careful documentation, his promise of a 12-week recovery protocol. 12 weeks. 3 months. What would Germany look like in 3 months? What would she look like? Greta climbed into the lower bunk. "Kat?" "Yes?" "Do you think they'll really feed us like that? Or was today special?" "I don't know. I can't go back to starving. Not after tasting that. I can't." Kat didn't answer. Couldn't answer, because she felt the same way. The next morning, Dr. Whitmore assembled his medical staff. 3 doctors, 2 nurses, 4 orderlies. Small team for a camp of 3,000 people, but functional. He spread his notes across the desk. "Starting today," he said, We implement the full feeding protocol. 44 subjects. Average BMI 14.1. Target recovery time 12 weeks. He handed out the schedules he'd prepared. Week 1. 1,200 calories per day. Easily digestible foods. Bone broth, soft bread, mashed vegetables. Monitor for refeeding syndrome. Daily weigh-ins at 0600 hours. Week 2. 1,500 calories. Add protein, scrambled eggs, ground meat. Continue monitoring. Watch for edema. Check electrolytes every 72 hours. Week 4. 1,800 calories. Introduce normal food textures. Regular bread, fresh vegetables. Begin vitamin supplementation. B1, B12, vitamin D. Week 8. 2,000 calories. Normal diet. Monitor weight gain. Target 2 pounds per week. No more, no less. Week 12. Assessment. Continue normal diet if weight is stable. BMI above 18.5. Release from intensive monitoring. This is medical, Dr. Whitmore said. Not humanitarian, not political. Medical. We're treating severe malnutrition. We follow protocol. We document everything. We do it right. His staff took the schedules. Daily weigh-ins start tomorrow. I want height, weight, BMI, and visual condition notes every day for all 44. That's a lot of data, sir, one of the nurses said. Good. I want a lot of data. Because when this war ends, someone's going to question whether this was necessary, whether these women were really as malnourished as we're claiming, and I want evidence that can't be argued with. He pulled out Katarina Bachmann's file. Subject 17, Bachmann. She's our baseline. 24 years old, 5'6", 89 pounds. BMI 14.3. We track her progress. We photograph it. We document every pound gained. Why her specifically? An orderly asked. Because she's average for this group. Not the worst case, not the best. Right in the middle. If the protocol works for her, it'll work for most of them. He closed the file. Get to work. They did. Starting November 24th, the day after Thanksgiving. Katarina Bachmann was weighed at 0600 hours. Height, 5 feet 6 inches. Weight, 89 pounds. BMI, 14.3. The same as her intake examination. That was expected. 1 day of feeding wouldn't change anything. But it was the baseline, the starting point. Dr. Whitmore made a note. Subject 17, Day 1 of protocol. No change from intake. Begin monitoring. November 25th, Day 2. Weight, 89 pounds. No change. November 26th, Day 3. Weight, 90 pounds. 1 pound gain. Doctor. Whitmore examined her. Checked for edema, swelling in the legs or feet. Early sign of refeeding syndrome. A dangerous condition where the body, suddenly given adequate nutrition after prolonged starvation, floods with fluids, can cause heart failure. No edema, no swelling. Her heart rate was still low, 72 beats per minute, but steadier than before. How do you feel? He asked. Less hungry. Pain anywhere? No. Nausea? No. Good. We continue the protocol. The days accumulated. Weight checks every morning. Documentation every afternoon. December 7th. 2 weeks into the protocol. Weight, 94 pounds. 5 pound gain. BMI, 15.1. Still critically underweight, but moving in the right direction. Dr. Whitmore increased her calories to 1,500 per day, added scrambled eggs to breakfast, ground beef to lunch. Her body accepted it. No rejection, no adverse reaction. December 14th, 3 weeks, weight 96 pounds. And then the first crisis hit. 3 women developed refeeding syndrome overnight, edema, swelling in ankles and feet, hearts struggling to adjust to adequate nutrition. Dr. Whitmore caught it during morning examinations, immediately adjusted their treatment, reduced calories, increased electrolyte supplementation, monitored hourly. All 3 stabilized within 36 hours, but it was a reminder. Recovery was fragile. The margin for error was thin. He documented everything: the symptoms, the intervention, the recovery timeline. Data for the next doctor who would face this challenge. December 21st, 4 weeks into the protocol. Weight, 99 pounds. 10-pound gain total. BMI, 15.9. Moving out of the critical range, entering serious malnutrition. Progress. Dr. Whitmore added more protein, more vegetables, more variety, and he watched, every day, recording everything. The other doctors handled the rest of the prisoners. But Dr. Whitmore personally monitored Katerina Bachmann, because she was the proof, the evidence that this was working, that careful, methodical, scientifically sound nutrition could reverse even severe starvation. He photographed her once a week, clinical photographs, standing against a white wall, no identifying features visible, just the body, the changes. Week 1, skeletal, ribs prominent, hip bones jutting, collarbones like knife edges. Week 4, slightly less skeletal, ribs still visible but less pronounced. Week 8, approaching normal, still thin but no longer dying. He filed the photographs with the weight charts, with the examination notes, with the detailed feeding logs, documentation, evidence, data, because data doesn't lie. Mid-January brought another crisis. A supply truck broke down en route from San Antonio, 3 days late. Fresh vegetables didn't arrive. Meat rations ran short. Sergeant Caldwell had to improvise. Canned goods, preserved foods, less variety but adequate calories. The women noticed, asked questions. Is the food running out? Are they stopping the protocol? Kat asked Dr. Whitmore during her examination. Just a delay, he said. Truck broke down. Normal by next week. And if it's not? Then we adjust. We have contingencies. You won't starve again, Katerina. I promise you that. The supplies arrived January 10th. Normal service resumed. But the fear had been real. The fear that abundance was temporary, that starvation would return. That fear took longer to heal than the body. One afternoon in mid-January, Kat asked Dr. Whitmore a question during her routine check-in. Why are you writing everything down? He'd been asked this before, on the first day, but her English was better now. 6 weeks of daily interaction with American soldiers. She could form more complex questions. Because when this war ends, he said, someone will claim this didn't happen, that we exaggerated, that you weren't really starving, that the photographs were staged, that the numbers were fabricated. He showed her the chart, her weight progression, the upward slope. This is proof, he said, objective, measurable, undeniable. You weighed 89 pounds on November 23rd. You weigh 103 pounds today, January 15th. That's not opinion. That's not propaganda. That's fact. She studied the chart. You think people will deny this? I know they will. People deny what they don't want to believe. especially when it challenges their assumptions. What assumptions? That their enemy was treated well, that war is noble, that everyone fought fair. He set down the stethoscope. Data doesn't lie, Katerina. People lie. Governments lie. Propaganda lies. But numbers just are. She was quiet for a moment. What will you do with this data? Archive it? Donate it to medical journals? Use it to improve POW treatment protocols. Make sure that the next time this happens, we know how to save lives. The next time? There's always a next time. She left the examination room thinking about that, about data, about truth, about the difference between what people said and what actually was. That night, in the barracks, she told the others what Dr. Whitmore had said, about the documentation, about the archives, about using their suffering to prevent future suffering. Ursula listened, then spoke. He's right. In Germany, I processed forms, numbers, data about food supplies, distribution, rationing. She paused. I saw the numbers declining, saw the evidence that we were losing, that people were starving. But the propaganda said we were winning, said abundance was coming. I believed the propaganda because I wanted to, because believing the numbers meant accepting that everything we'd sacrificed was for nothing. She looked at the others. But the numbers were true, and the propaganda was lies. And Dr. Whitmore understands that. That's why he writes everything down. Greta nodded slowly. In Hamburg, after the firebombing, we didn't have records. Everything burned. So when people asked how many died, we could only guess. 10,000? 40,000? Nobody knew. And without numbers, it became whatever people wanted it to be. Propaganda. Estimates. Lies. The barracks was quiet. Then Kat said, "So we let him document everything. We cooperate. We give him his data. Because someday, someone needs to know the truth." The others agreed. And they did. For 12 weeks, they cooperated with the protocol, ate what they were given, attended the daily weigh-ins, submitted to the examinations and the photographs and the endless documentation. Not because they liked it, because they understood it, because they'd lived under propaganda long enough to value evidence. By January 18, 1945, Katharina Bachmann weighed 107 pounds, BMI 17.2, out of danger, still underweight, still recovering, but no longer dying. Dr. Whitmore made the final notation in her file. Subject 17, 12-week protocol complete. Initial weight 89 pounds. Final weight 107 pounds. Total gain 18 pounds. Average rate 1.5 pounds per week, within safe parameters. Refeeding syndrome avoided. Recovery successful. Recommend continued monitoring but reduced frequency. Transition to normal diet and normal activity levels. He closed the file. Look at the stack of files beside it. 43 more, all with similar progressions, similar outcomes, 0 deaths. Unprecedented for severe malnutrition cases. The protocol had worked. He'd done his job. He'd saved them. Now they had to decide what to do with the lives he'd given back. Because the war wasn't over, and harder questions were coming. Late December, 1944. The holiday season had brought change to Fort Stockton. Christmas had passed with another feast, ham and sweet potatoes and apple pie. The German prisoners were learning to accept American abundance, learning that it wasn't temporary, wasn't a trick. This was simply how they would be treated. But now, with the new year approaching, harder questions emerged. Red Cross parcels had arrived, writing paper, envelopes, pencils, stamps, permission to write letters home. The women gathered in the barracks on December 28th, staring at blank paper like it was a test they might fail. "What do we write?" someone asked. Greta picked up a pencil, sat on her bunk. "The truth," she said. "Whatever parts of it they'll let through." But the truth was complicated. How do you tell your mother that the Americans feed you better than Germany ever did? How do you explain that you're gaining weight while everyone at home is starving? How do you say that you're grateful for captivity without sounding like a traitor? Kat stared at the blank paper for an hour. Finally, she wrote, "Dearest Mutter, I am well. The Americans treat us according to Geneva Convention. We receive adequate food and shelter. I am healthy. I think of you every day. I hope you are safe. I hope Berlin still stands. I hope we will see each other again when this is over. Your daughter, Katarina." 53 words. Censored. Approved. Meaningless. Nothing about the pie. Nothing about the crying. Nothing about the realization that everything they'd been told was lies. Just, "I am well." She sealed the envelope, addressed it to her parents' apartment in Charlottenburg. Had no idea if the building still existed, if her parents were alive, if the letter would ever arrive. But she sent it anyway, because hope required action, however small. Greta wrote something similar. Hamburg address. Same careful neutrality. Ursula didn't write at all. She had no one left to write to. The letters were collected, sent through Red Cross channels, would take weeks to arrive, might never arrive. But the act of writing them mattered. January passed. February. March. The women grew stronger, healthier. The feeding protocol continued. By late March, most of them were approaching normal weight. Dr. Whitmore's documentation showed the progression clearly. Average BMI, November 23rd, 14.1. Average BMI, March 20th, 17.8. Still below ideal, but no longer critical, no longer dying. 0 deaths out of 44 severely malnourished women. 0. It was unprecedented, and Dr. Whitmore had every data point to prove it. April brought news. President Roosevelt died on April 12th. The camp held a memorial service. The German prisoners attended, silent, respectful. They'd been taught that Roosevelt was their enemy, the architect of Germany's destruction. But sitting in the chapel, listening to Americans grieve, they saw something else. They saw people mourning a leader they'd loved, the way Germans had been taught to mourn Hitler, but different. This grief was real, personal, not manufactured. It confused them, added to the growing list of things that didn't match what they'd been told. April 30th brought different news. Hitler was dead, suicide in his Berlin bunker. The Reich was collapsing. Colonel Townsend gathered the camp, American soldiers and German prisoners together. "The war in Europe is nearly over," he said. "Germany will surrender within days. When that happens, you will have decisions to make about your futures." Lieutenant Hargrove translated. The barracks that night was silent. Germany defeated. The Reich destroyed. Everything they'd served, everything they'd believed in, gone. "What do we return to?" someone asked quietly. No one had an answer. May 8, 1945, VE Day, Victory in Europe. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. The Americans celebrated, cautiously. Many still had brothers and friends fighting in the Pacific. But Europe was done. The German prisoners gathered in their barracks. didn't celebrate, didn't mourn, just sat in silence, processing. 3 days later, Colonel Townsend made an announcement. The War Department has issued guidelines for prisoner repatriation. Starting in June, transport ships will return POWs to Europe. You will be given the opportunity to return to Germany. He paused. However, under the displaced persons provisions, you may also request asylum in the United States, if you have a sponsor. If you can demonstrate means of support, if you wish to stay. Lieutenant Hargrove translated. The barracks erupted. Voices overlapping. German rapid fire. Questions. Confusion. Disbelief. Stay in America? How? Why would they let us? Ursula stood. Quiet, she said. Her voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stopped. This is a choice, she said. Maybe the first real choice we've had in years. Think carefully before you decide. Over the next week, the women talked, argued, calculated. Return to Germany meant returning to rubble, to starvation, to occupation, to uncertainty. Hamburg was destroyed. Berlin was destroyed. Dresden was destroyed. Most of their cities were gone. Families were scattered, dead, missing. Jobs were gone. Homes were gone. But it was home. Staying in America meant starting over. New language, new culture, new life. But it meant food, safety, the possibility of a future. 9 women chose to stay. Kat was one of them. Her reasoning was simple. I wrote to my parents in December, she told Greta. No response. Either they're dead, or the letter never arrived. Either way, I have nothing to return to. And here? Here I have Dr. Whitmore, who saw me as a patient, not an enemy. Sergeant Caldwell, who saw me as hungry, not German. Private Patterson, who gave me his handkerchief and asked nothing in return. Here, data mattered more than propaganda. Greta nodded. She was staying too. Hamburg is rubble. My parents are probably dead. And I'm a nurse. I can work anywhere. Might as well work somewhere that has supplies. Ursula's decision was harder. She had no family, no ties, no reason to return. But Germany was still Germany, her homeland, her language, her culture. I don't know if I can be American, she said. You don't have to be American, Kat replied. You just have to be here. Ursula thought about that. Thought about her husband and son executed for telling the truth about the war. Thought about the regime that had murdered them. Thought about the Americans who had fed her pie. I'll stay, she said finally, but not for America, for them, for my family, because they died telling the truth. And staying here is one more way of saying they were right. The asylum applications required sponsors. Dr. Whitmore sponsored Kat, signed the affidavit, promised housing assistance and employment support. Sergeant Caldwell sponsored Greta. A Lutheran church group in Chicago sponsored Ursula. The paperwork took months. June, July, August. The war with Japan ended. VJ Day, August 15th. The World War was over. But for the 9 German women seeking asylum, the bureaucratic war continued. Forms, interviews, background checks, medical examinations, loyalty assessments. Finally, in September, approval came. All 9 were granted entry under displaced persons provisions. They would stay in America. The other 35 would return to Germany. Transport ships leaving in October. The farewells were emotional. Women who'd survived starvation together, who'd cried into their pie together, who'd watched each other heal, now separating. Kat said goodbye to women whose names she'd memorized, whose stories she knew. Young women from Stuttgart and Munich, older women from Cologne and Frankfurt, all returning to an uncertain future. "Write to me," Kat said, over and over. "Let me know you're alive." Some promised, some just nodded, some cried. On October 3rd, the transport trucks arrived. 35 women boarded, heading to the port, to ships that would carry them back across the Atlantic. Kat stood with the 9 who were staying, watching the trucks pull away, feeling relief and guilt in equal measure. Relief that she was staying, guilt that she felt relieved. Greta stood beside her. "Strange," she said. "6 months ago, I'd have done anything to go home. Now home is going away, and I'm staying here. Do you regret it? Ask me in a year." But before the camp fully transitioned, there was one more thing Kat needed to do. Late December, 1945, Sergeant Caldwell had remained at Fort Stockton through the transition period. Now she was preparing to retire, move back to Nebraska, open a small bakery. Kat found her in the mess hall, cleaning, organizing, preparing to hand over operations. "Sergeant?" Caldwell turned, smiled when she saw Kat. "Look at you," she said. "Healthy, strong. I almost didn't recognize you." It was true. Kat now weighed 118 pounds, BMI 18.9, healthy range. The 12-week protocol had extended to 14 months of careful nutrition. Her face had filled out. Her eyes were bright. She looked alive. "I wanted to give you something," Kat said. She pulled out the silver spoon, her grandmother's spoon, the one she'd kept hidden for over a year. "I know I said I'd come back for this, but I want you to keep it. Really keep it." Sergeant Caldwell's eyes went wet. "I can't. Please. You gave us sweetness when we'd forgotten it existed. This spoon, it's from before the war, before the hunger. It represents a world I'm leaving behind." She pressed it into Caldwell's hand. "Keep it. Remember what you did for us, what you did for me." Caldwell held the spoon, felt the weight of it. "All right," she said quietly, "but only if you promise me something." "What?" "Promise you'll make pumpkin pie every year. Remember what it meant." Kat nodded. "I promise." Caldwell went to her office, returned with a card. Handwritten recipe. "My mother's pumpkin pie recipe, from the farm in Nebraska. It's what I used that day, November 23rd. Kat took the card, read the ingredients, the measurements, the instructions. At the bottom, Caldwell had written a note. "For Katerina. Make this every year. Remember that truth is sweeter than lies." The camp slowly transitioned from POP facility to Displaced Persons Processing Center. The 9 German women moved to temporary housing, began English classes, began job training. Kat worked as a translator for the War Department. Her German was fluent. Her English was improving daily. She helped process documents, translate correspondence, bridge the gap between languages. It paid $60 a month, enough to live on. She rented a small room in a boarding house in Washington, D.C., shared a bathroom with 3 other residents, cooked on a hot plate. It was the first space that had been truly hers in years. Greta enrolled in nursing courses, studying American medical terminology, American procedures, working toward certification. Ursula moved to Chicago, took a job with a translation agency, German to English. Business documents mostly. They wrote letters. Every month, keeping in touch, keeping each other grounded. Time moved. Months became years. 1946, 1947. Kat met Fletcher Erickson in early 1948. He was a veteran, Signal Corps, had served in Europe, radio operator. They met at a War Department function, started talking about communications equipment, technical details, frequencies, protocols. He was 26, quiet, thoughtful, from Minnesota, dairy farm family. "My brother wanted to be a farmer," he said. "I wanted to see the world. War gave me that. Not sure it was worth it." They dated for 6 months, carefully, navigating the strange reality that they'd technically been enemies during the war. He never asked about her time as a POW. Never pressed. She told him anyway, about the hunger, the fear, the propaganda, the Thanksgiving dinner, the pie, the crying. About Dr. Whitmore and his obsessive documentation. About Sergeant Caldwell and her kindness. About the choice to stay. He listened without judgment. "My unit helped liberate a work camp in Germany," he said quietly. "Saw what starvation looked like. Saw people who weighed 70 pounds, barely alive." He looked at her. "I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you stayed." They married in November 1948. Small ceremony, Justice of the Peace. Greta and Ursula both traveled to Washington for it. Kat wore a simple dress, carried no flowers, had no family present, but she had Fletcher and Greta and Ursula, and that was enough. They moved to Minnesota in 1949, Fletcher's family farm. His parents were aging, needed help. Kat learned to milk cows, to drive a tractor, to bake bread in a wood-fired oven. She learned to be a farmer's wife. It was harder than communications work, but simpler, quieter. They had children, 3 of them, a son in 1950, named David, after Fletcher's brother who died at Normandy. Twin daughters in 1952, named Margaret and Ruth, after Greta and Lieutenant Hargrove. The children grew up speaking English, knowing they had a German mother, but thinking of themselves as American. Kat told them stories sometimes, about Berlin, about the war, about hunger, but not often. The past was past. Except on November 23rd. Every year, every single year, Kat made pumpkin pie, using the recipe Sergeant Caldwell had given her. She made it for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, and once more on November 23rd specifically. Anniversary of the day everything changed. The children learned to recognize the ritual. "Why 3 times?" David asked when he was 12. Kat measured cinnamon into the filling, considered her answer. "Because the first pie I ever ate in America taught me 3 things," she said. "That propaganda can be destroyed by evidence. That kindness is stronger than ideology. That sweetness exists even in dark times. 3 pies, 3 lessons, 3 times a year to remember." David didn't fully understand, but he accepted it. Years passed. 1955 arrived. Kat made a pilgrimage back to Fort Stockton. The camp was closed, repurposed, but Sergeant Caldwell still lived nearby. They met, had coffee, talked about the years. "I kept something for you," Caldwell said. She went to the back, returned with a small box. Inside was the silver spoon. Kat's grandmother's spoon, given to Caldwell 10 years earlier. "You said keep it." "I did. But I think it should go back to your family now. Pass it to your children." Kat held the spoon, felt the weight of it, the memories. "Thank you for keeping it safe. Thank you for trusting me with it." 1962 arrived. Kat was 42 years old. Her children were teenagers. The farm was stable. She received a letter from the National Archives. They were collecting World War II medical documentation, creating a comprehensive archive. Wanted to know if she had any materials. She didn't, but she knew someone who did. She wrote to Dr. Whitmore. He was 73 now, retired, living in Maryland. Dr. Whitmore, I hope this letter finds you well. The National Archives is seeking World War II medical records. I wondered if you still have the documentation from Fort Stockton. The feeding protocol. The data. If so, I think it belongs in the archives, so others can learn from it. Katarina Bachmann Eriksson. His response came 3 weeks later. Katarina, I have everything. Every weight chart, every examination note, every photograph. I've kept it all these years specifically for this purpose. I will donate it to the archives, but I'd like you to be there when I do. You were subject 17, the baseline, the proof. You should be present for the handover. Dr. Horace Whitmore. They met at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, June 19, 1962. Dr. Whitmore brought 17 boxes, carefully labeled, organized, complete. Medical logs, weight charts, photographs, dietary plans, examination notes, progress reports. 17 years of storage, preserved, protected. The archivist who received the donation was young, didn't fully grasp what he was looking at. Dr. Whitmore explained, "This is documentation of the successful treatment of severe malnutrition in 44 POWs, November 1944 through February 1945. Average BMI at intake, 14.1. Average BMI at conclusion, 17.8. 0 deaths." He pulled out Kat's file. This is the baseline case. Subject 17. Bachmann, Katarina. Initial weight 89 pounds. Final weight 107 pounds. 18-pound gain over 12 weeks. He opened the file, showed the progression charts, the photographs. Week 1, skeletal. Week 12, healthy. Visual evidence that couldn't be disputed. This protocol saved lives, Dr. Whitmore said, and it should be available for future medical professionals to study, so they know how to treat severe starvation safely. The archivist understood then. This will be preserved, he promised, cataloged, made available to researchers. Dr. Whitmore nodded, satisfied. He turned to Kat. "Your data mattered," he said, "just like I told you it would." Kat thought about that, about being reduced to numbers, height, weight, BMI, about how those numbers had saved her life, about how documentation had mattered more than intention, evidence more than kindness. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me as data, for caring enough to write it all down. It was my job. It was more than that." They parted, shook hands, promised to stay in touch. Kat never saw him again. Dr. Whitmore died in 1967. Heart attack. Age 78. His obituary mentioned his World War II service, his medical innovations, his contributions to POW treatment protocols, but not specifically about Fort Stockton, not about the 44 women, not about Subject 17. That story remained in the archives, waiting. 1983 arrived. Kat was 63 years old, widowed. Fletcher had died in 1981, heart failure. Too many years of hard farm work. The children were grown. David was a telecommunications engineer. Margaret was a teacher. Ruth was a nurse, like Greta. Kat still lived on the farm, alone now, but content. A graduate student from the University of Texas contacted her. Oral history project, collecting stories from World War II displaced persons. Would she be willing to be interviewed? She agreed. The interview took place in her kitchen, October 15, 1983. The student was young, earnest. Set up a tape recorder. Asked permission to record. Kat said yes. "Tell me about your experience as a prisoner of war," the student said. Kat thought about where to start, decided on the truth, all of it. She talked for 3 hours about Berlin, about hunger, about propaganda, about capture, about Fort Stockton, about Dr. Whitmore, about Sergeant Caldwell, about Thanksgiving dinner, about the pie, about crying, about breaking, about choosing to stay. The student listened, asked follow-up questions, took notes. At the end, she asked one final question. "What's the most important thing you learned from that experience?" Kat looked out the window, at the farm, at the life she'd built. "I learned that institutions matter, that protocols matter, that data matters. Dr. Whitmore didn't save me because he liked me. He saved me because he followed proper medical procedure, because he documented everything, because he believed in evidence over ideology. And I learned that small acts of kindness, done consistently, are more powerful than grand gestures." Sergeant Caldwell didn't give a speech about humanity. She just made pie. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. Just did her job with care. She paused. "I keep her recipe in my kitchen. I've made it 127 times. Once every Thanksgiving, once every Christmas, and once every November 23rd. To remember." To remember what? That the day I learned the truth tasted like pumpkin and cinnamon, and that truth is always sweeter than lies. The interview ended. The tape was archived. University of Texas collection, available to researchers. Another piece of evidence, another data point. The years continued. Kat grew older, slower, but still sharp, still remembering. 1998 arrived. Kat was 78 years old. She died on March 14th, peacefully, in her sleep, on the farm. Her obituary ran in the Minneapolis newspaper. Katharina Bachmann Eriksson, 78, died March 14, 1998. Born in Berlin, Germany, she immigrated to the United States in 1945 as a displaced person. She worked as a translator for the War Department before marrying Fletcher Erickson and settling in rural Minnesota. She was a dedicated farm wife, mother of 3, and advocate for displaced persons' rights. She believed institutions matter, protocols matter, and data matters. She will be remembered for her strength, her clarity, and her insistence on evidence over ideology. Survived by 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. The funeral was small, family, close friends. Greta traveled from Boston, 97 years old now, frail but determined. Ursula had died in 1992, but had sent letters to Kat every month for 47 years. At the service, David read from his mother's oral history. The part about pumpkin pie, about truth, about sweetness. There was a reception afterward. Food provided by the church, including pumpkin pie, made from Sergeant Caldwell's recipe. Kat's granddaughter, Ingrid, had made it, using the stained, butter-marked card Kat had kept for 43 years. Ingrid was 23 years old, studying nutrition at the University of Minnesota. She'd grown up hearing the stories. about Berlin, about hunger, about the pie that changed everything. She'd always been interested in food, in nutrition, in how what we eat affects who we are. Now, standing at her grandmother's funeral, holding a pie made from a 53-year-old recipe, she understood. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was evidence, connection, truth. After the funeral, Ingrid kept her grandmother's papers, the letters, the oral history transcript, the pie recipe, and one more thing, a silver spoon, tarnished, handle bent, found in Kat's jewelry box with a note, "My grandmother's spoon. Given to Sergeant Winifred Caldwell, December 1945. Returned to me, 1955. Keep it. Remember where it came from." Ingrid kept it, finished her nutrition degree, got her master's, became a registered dietitian. In 2003, she took a job at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Minneapolis, developing nutrition programs for veterans, particularly those returning from deployment with malnutrition or eating disorders. She used her great-great-grandmother's data, Dr. Whitmore's protocols, the archived documentation from Fort Stockton, gradual refeeding, careful monitoring, documentation of everything. The protocols that had saved her grandmother's life, now being used to save others. She kept the silver spoon in her office, on her desk, with a small plaque beneath it. From starvation to sweetness. KB, November 23, 1944. Patients asked about it sometimes, and Ingrid told them the story about a 24-year-old German communications officer who weighed 89 pounds, about a doctor who documented everything, about a sergeant who made pie, about the moment when truth tasted like cinnamon and cream, about how data saved a life, and how that data continued saving lives 60 years later. The National Archives in College Park, Maryland, present day, Box 47, Series 4, World War II medical documentation. Inside, 17 boxes of files from Fort Stockton, Texas, POW medical treatment, 1944 to 1945. Donated by Dr. Horace Whitmore, June 1962. Researchers access them occasionally. Medical students, historians, nutritionists. They find examination logs, weight charts, photographs, dietary plans. They find Subject 17, Bachmann, Katavina. Initial weight, 89 pounds. Final weight, 107 pounds. They find documentation that proves severe malnutrition can be reversed. That careful protocol saves lives. That evidence matters. The files are preserved. Climate-controlled storage, acid-free paper, archival boxes, protected, available, waiting. For the next person who needs to know that data doesn't lie, that truth matters, that a piece of pie can change everything. In Minneapolis, in a kitchen drawer, a stained recipe card, handwriting faded but readable. Putin pie, Winifred Caldwell, 1944. Ingredients listed. Measurements precise. Instructions clear. On the back, a note. Different handwriting. Added later. Made this 127 times, once for every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and November 23rd, from 1955 to 1998. Never forgot what it meant. Never forgot what it taught me. Truth is sweeter than lies. Always. KBE. The card sits alongside other family recipes, passed down, used, loved. Every November, someone pulls it out, makes the pie, serves it. Tells the story about a war, about hunger, about a doctor who documented everything, about a sergeant who showed kindness through cooking, about a young German woman who weighed 89 pounds and learned that the truth tasted like pumpkin and cinnamon. The story doesn't end. It continues, in data, in archives, in recipes, in memories, in the understanding that small acts of care, done consistently with attention to evidence, matter more than grand gestures. That institutions that function properly save lives. That protocols exist for a reason. That documentation protects truth. That a piece of pie on November 23, 1944, changed one woman's life, and through careful preservation of data, continues changing lives today. 44 women arrived at Fort Stockton, Texas on November 2, 1944. Average BMI 14.1. Critical starvation. 12 weeks later, average BMI 17.8. Recovering. 0 deaths. 9 became United States citizens. 35 returned to Germany. All survived. Because a doctor believed in data. Because a sergeant believed in kindness. Because evidence mattered more than propaganda. 247 descendants alive today, 2024. Americans, citizens, contributors. All because of pie. All because someone documented it. All because truth, once written down, becomes impossible to erase. The lesson isn't about heroes or villains. It's about how easy it is for a trainload of people to become a footnote. How thin the line between being seen and being erased. Dr. Whitmore saw data. Sergeant Caldwell saw hunger. They both saw human beings and wrote it down. That made all the difference. The question isn't whether you'd feed the enemy. The question is, how many trainloads are sitting on tracks right now, waiting for someone to see the data instead of the propaganda? How many Subject 17s are waiting for someone to document their truth? How many pieces of pie could change how many lives, if only someone cared enough to write it down, to preserve it, to protect it, to pass it on? Data doesn't lie. People lie. Governments lie. Propaganda lies. But numbers just are. Height, weight, BMI, calories, days, pounds gained. Evidence. Truth. Sweeter than any lie. Every time.